friends, welcome to episode 58 of Storyteller Conclave. This is a show all about helping you run the best tabletop role-playing game that you can, whether you're a new storyteller or dungeon master learning the craft, or an experienced storyteller looking to take your game up to the next level. I am Sarah.
And I'm Rob.
How we doing, Rob?
I'm okay.
Yeah, I had to think a little hard about that one. There's a lot going on in the world right now.
There is.
And,
It's been a long day, and like the run up to this was just like little ups and downs of things, and so it gives you a lot to pause and think about.
Yeah.
So yeah.
And aside from that, I think just today has just been a rough day for both of us.
Oh yeah.
I know me. I woke up with like a half a migraine, which finally went away.
Congratulations.
Like, it's just kind of like a dull throb in the back of my head.
Mm-hmm.
And got practically nothing done at work today because I was fighting with software all day.
I was fighting connections all day today. Like, it was just a pain in my butt. It wasn't until close to the end of day, like my quote-unquote work day, that I was actually able to do anything relatively functional. And then I find out that there's a massive storm coming in. Mm-hmm. And so any work that I would like to do tonight, it's all dependent on power and connectivity. So we'll see. We'll see.
You don't know if
but we are here.
The heavens are going to be coming down or whatnot. So, oh, summer in Michigan. How we love you.
It is pretty nice at times.
Big shout out to everybody in the live chat. Thanks for joining us tonight.
Thank you for joining us on MixLR. We're glad to have you there as well, listening in.
Yep, and if you are not listening live, you can listen live every 7 p.m. Eastern Time on Wednesday nights on mixlr.com/storyteller-conclave. And listen to us live there, and we'd love to have you in the live chat as well on Discord.
Yeah, join us, please.
So tonight...
Yes.
Tonight, I'm excited because we're talking about one of my favorite game systems.
Which is funny. Like, I have never ran Fate.
Uh-huh.
I've been involved in Fate games. But I think the last Fate game I actually played in was probably well over 10 years ago.
It's probably been about 5 or so for... No. It's been more recent than that for me.
For you.
Maybe 3.
Okay.
Maybe 3.
Was that a Dresden game?
It was actually, we were trying to do Wheel of Time.
Oh, okay.
Using Fate.
Okay. Fair.
And it went pretty well, but we did do some Dresden. Mm-hmm. We did do some Dresden as well. So we've got a little peppering. Nothing ever really went like a long campaign sort of thing. You know, a couple game sessions, we kind of got our feet wet with it, but I think we were having a little bit of trouble sinking our teeth into the game system. It's a really great, very intriguing, very good game system, but it is what I would say a dramatic shift mentally for how to run it from like your typical D&D.
Okay, from your strategy type
system.
Yeah.
But we'll kind of get into that.
Yeah. No doubt.
So let's start talking a little bit about just what Fate is, just so we can kind of lay the groundwork for the discussion we're about to have. Fate is a core rule set by Evil Hat Productions.
Mm-hmm.
They're currently in their 4th edition of it.
Yep.
It's a generic rule set, very much like GURPS, where you can kind of do anything with it. It doesn't have a setting necessarily of its own. There are setting books that use the Fate system, like we mentioned Dresden before.
Closer to D20 in that generic sense.
Yes. Like if you were to buy not D&D, but just the D20 rule set, and then D&D was maybe an expansion for that.
Correct.
That's more what we're talking about.
Right.
And so the cool thing about it is you can then adapt it to really any sort of setting you want. Mm-hmm. It's very flexible in that. It does have several toolkits that are available for it for expanding the rules in certain directions. Mm-hmm. So there's a horror toolkit, a space toolkit. I recently saw that they had a Kickstarter that was either coming to a close very soon or has just recently closed for Fate of Cthulhu.
Ooh,
yeah,
that's totally up your alley right there.
Yes, it is. And so very much like GURPS, it's kind of got your what we call splat books. To take you in those particular directions.
Right.
And then it also has a very narrative style of gaming. So I think it would really honestly be right up your alley.
I mean, the more I go back to looking at it, the more I'm intrigued about running something in it. And in fact, there were a couple times where in the past that I had considered using it to do 7th Sea, to use the 7th Sea universe, but run it as Fate instead.
I think it would do well.
It's easy.
I think it would do well.
Yeah.
Doing that, yes.
But I think one of the things that kind of sets the stage for what Fate is it is not a tactical game. It is not a number-heavy game. It takes those parts out and puts it in a different style of system than what we traditionally talk about. But that doesn't change. It changes some of our focus, because whereas with D&D we're talking about how much you as a storyteller need to impart upon the players and how to impart those things, and when you deal with Fate and systems like Fate, there's a lot more cooperation that's happening with the players on building those worlds, and you get to, it sounds funny, but you kind of do get to take a step back as storyteller and take a breath. And for people who've been buried in D&D and doing that, it can sometimes be a little jarring.
It is. It's pretty jarring. Also because a lot of the, for me, some of the main aspects of Fate is that it's very narrative based, and you don't have a lot of numbers to deal with.
No.
At all. You have what are called aspects, and we'll get more into those in a moment. But they're word descriptors.
Yeah.
And so there's. I mean, how do you put a numeric value on a word descriptor? Well, I mean, you actually don't, and that's exactly the point. And for someone who comes from, years of Dungeons & Dragons, where I've never really been that crunch heavy, like I've never been a real big min-maxer or anything, but I'm used to the numbers being there as a comfort level, I'm used to the numbers being there as a measurement that I can, a metric by which I can look at my character and say, he's good at this or she's bad at that.
Okay.
And such like that. But you don't have those sort of things in Fate. You've got some skill numbers, and everything else is a word descriptor.
Yeah.
And it's neither good nor bad, but it really depends on the situation and how it comes into the situation.
Right. You aren't leveled against something. You are an individual in a story, in a world.
Yeah.
And it's a lot of times I look at game systems like Fate, and I think they sit in a much more comfortable storytelling movie aspect, where you have a person in a world doing extraordinary things.
Right? In a world.
I don't want to get sued.
Fair enough.
But or have to pay for that. But yeah, if you look at movies in general, you have not necessarily average individuals, but you have individuals who are challenged by the situation for which they are in. They are not accustomed to whatever that is, and Fate really draws that. Whereas you have something like D&D where it's very tactical, and it's, I've built this group to achieve a goal.
Right.
And yes, they're going to run through struggles, and sometimes you're going to have storytellers that are going to push the personality aspects of that and kind of drive into that direction. But most of the time, it's, can this axe get through that armor?
Exactly. We are a third level group. We cannot fight that monster.
Right. But maybe if we do this and this and this, and talk to this group and this group and this group, and go work around this direction and this direction, we can.
Right.
Because the numbers work out.
Exactly. And in Fate, it's more that everyone's just kind of a dramatis personae, and you just work with that.
You and your newfangled words.
Hey.
I liked it, though.
What makes Fate different? Other than, what we've kind of already gone over. So Fate uses some special dice.
Yeah, so for all you out there who love collecting dice, Fate is a new dice game for you.
Fate will add 4 new dice to your dice bag. Just 4.
Just four.
But they're cool.
Yeah.
No, what they are is they're 6-sided dice. So you can use just regular 6-sided dice for this if you don't want to go and buy new dice for them.
Right.
What they are is they're 6-siders. 2 of them are pluses, 2 of them are blank, and 2 of them are minuses.
Sided-wise.
These are called Fate dice. Are they formerly known as Fudge dice? Because I believe the system used to be called Fudge.
Yes.
Back in the day. So if you want your Fate dice, just your pluses and minuses, and the game system that goes along with that is very simple. Whenever you're going to make a skill check, and it's really the only checks that you roll dice for, because it's about the only numerical component that you've got. You take your skill rating, and you roll all 4 dice. You always roll all 4 dice, and your pluses and minus just increment or decrement that number. So if you've got a 3 in a skill, and you roll like 2 minuses, a plus, and a blank, the net on those dice of 2 minuses, 1 plus, and 1 blank comes out to -1.
Yep.
So you take your 3 skill, you subtract 1 from it, you hit a 2.
There you go.
If that's at or above your target number, you succeeded. If it's extremely above your target number, you succeeded with what do they call this? With style.
With
You
style.
succeeded with style. If it's lower, then you either fail or you have some consequences.
There's consequences, yeah.
And that's it. You just learned all the dice rolling that takes place in Fate.
Yeah. And when you do succeed, there's no measure of success besides other than success and great success. Really. I mean, you could go through numbers and play with the variations, but every storyteller is going to set what very good is in a different way.
Right. And we didn't get into what the other complication in there is, and that's how your aspects come into play.
Oh, Lord.
On
Yeah.
things. So that's your other major thing of the game, is that everything is very heavily narrative, like we've mentioned.
Right.
And your aspects are, like I said, word descriptors of things. Okay, and they're not even like.
And you usually have what, like 4 or 5 of them?
You have a lot, actually, because during character creation, they actually start during character creation.
Yeah.
Okay. You don't start with characters; you start with setting.
Yes.
Okay, and this is one of the big things that I love about Fate, is that everybody in it's almost like a built-in session 0.
Yes.
You have to have a session 0.
You have to.
Because everybody gets a say in what the setting is. And even in things like that are established settings, like the Dresden Files, well, where are you playing?
What city?
What city are you playing? Is it Chicago?
Yeah.
Where the books are set, or is it
Right.
somewhere else? We
Right.
played in Detroit when we played. Okay, so there's no canon, setting for Detroit.
What time?
So, well,
Yeah.
it's contemporary for
Right.
Dresden, but again, if you're
could
just
change
playing
it,
random Fate, then
Yeah.
yeah, sure, exactly. What time period? Are you playing a medieval game? Are you playing a space age game? Are you playing cyberpunk? What is it? What's going on in the city? What complicating factors are there? And you don't need to fill in a lot of the blanks with like pages of backstory or anything like that.
Very
But,
simple.
Hey, the mafia is a thing. Okay, the mafia. What does the mafia function as in this story? Okay, the mafia's got everybody under their thumb. Okay, cool. So the city now has the aspect under the mafia's thumb.
There you go. Simple.
Period. You just write under the mafia's thumb on a piece of paper. Okay, that's it. You might add 2 or 3 more aspects to your story, but you don't want to overcomplicate things this time. The story doesn't have to be its own character.
Right.
But then you continue.
Or the setting doesn't have to be its own character.
Right. But then you continue with characters.
Right.
Okay, so now that we know where these characters exist and kind of what environmental factors are going on and what sort of story we're aiming towards here.
Right.
Now what characters exist in that setting?
Right.
And how do they tie to the setting?
Right.
So you've already got kind of backstory for everybody right there. Okay, so we're playing in the city of Detroit, and the mafia's got everybody under their thumb. So what character do you make that exists in that situation that is dynamic, that is driven, that is heroic?
Yep.
Stage 2 then of creating your characters is going through and tying in your backstories to everybody else. And this generates more aspects for you because it establishes a history. This is kind of like where your background functions in D&D. So it gives you a little bit of like, this is what happened before the story, so you didn't just poof out of midair. And because of that, you've got some history. You've got some aspects. You've got some personality traits or hang-ups or unresolved trauma or whatever those aspects are.
Oh, yeah. And the joy of that is that you can basically sky's the limit and bounce the ideas off of each other. Whereas, like, a lot of times with D&D or tactical games, you're thinking of your class and building a character, or vice versa, in almost silence. It's with you and the storyteller, and that's pretty much it.
Yeah, you pour over books, you pour over the expansions, and you go, oh, I would really like to play an arcane archer fighter. Those sound interesting because their class abilities look cool.
Right.
And you don't talk that over with anybody else in the group. Maybe you do, maybe you don't.
Maybe if they're an established group and you're like, is this something you guys could use?
Yeah.
or what could need, or to the storyteller of like, oh, okay, so how would I fit this into the world? Like, could I be coming from this region? Do they have that region? Now that exists, it's there.
Yeah.
And this is where you start stepping over. I think Fate sits right on that line between, or closer on the line between tactical than some of the other games where, much like City of Mist or Urban Shadows, where you're City of Mist definitely kind of sits a little closer, but Urban Shadows kind of sits in the realm of everyone is telling the story. The world is very much built by the players.
Yes.
Whole cloth.
Yes.
And you focus on that. Fate kind of leans to that apocalypse world design.
Well, Sean Heatsink was actually just discussing, I think, in the general thread on our Discord a little bit earlier today, that everything in Fate is a negotiation.
Correct.
Okay.
Yep.
And that kind of gets into where these aspects come into play. We've used the word aspects a lot, but we haven't really described what mechanical function they have. They are written descriptors, and again, they can just kind of be anything. They're either your job or a descriptor of like, sucker for a pretty face, something like that. That can be invoked for a bonus or compelled for a detriment. And therein lies your second major game mechanic in Fate, and that comes in Fate tokens. So you're not only going to have your fudge dice or your Fate dice sitting in front of you, but you're also going to have probably a stack of tokens, poker chips,
right?
Little glass beads, whatever you want to represent them, pennies, and you'll start with a certain amount. Each player will start with a certain amount, and the storyteller will sit with a certain amount. Mm-hmm. Okay, as gameplay takes place. Your aspects will either be compelled or invoked. So you may have the aspect sucker for a pretty face, just to use it as an example.
Sure.
I, as the storyteller, will then say, okay, so this woman walks up to you and she's saying, hey, I really need your help. Rob, I believe you're a sucker for a pretty face. Isn't that right? And you say, yes, I am. I'll say, how do you think that might come into play? And I might offer you a Fate token for that.
Right.
Okay. Now, it's very much like how hubris works in 7th
yeah.
Where you've got that kind of a negative attribute to you, and the storyteller can offer you... Right. They can offer you a drama die to bring that in as a complication for your role-playing.
Right.
So,
and probably in the same way, I can spend a Fate and basically say, no.
No, I think I'm just going to play this one straight.
Right.
Yeah, exactly. And you can spend a Fate token to not have that compel take place.
Right.
That's exactly how it works.
Yeah, so in that regard, those are almost identical.
Mm-hmm.
Or at least for first edition. We'll leave it there.
But therein, you've then gotten kind of an economy where your aspects will come into play and kind of inform your role play. But it's not like I'm going to just force you to just be at her beck and call and suddenly you're just playing into her hands because you wrote sucker for a pretty face on there. There's a negotiation that takes place. There's a discussion, but it should, if you accept the Fate token, inform your role play and probably play out to your detriment. Maybe not as the way that you might optimally not want that scene to go. On the other hand, though, you can invoke things, and invokes are the other major expenditure of Fate tokens. This is why you would want to take a compel, because you want those Fate tokens in your hand so that later you can use them.
Correct.
Okay, so you can do things. For instance, if you have an aspect that works to your advantage, sucker for a pretty face might also imply that you have a good amount of experience dealing with with ladies. Okay. So sure, it doesn't always turn out for you, and so sometimes they lead you around by your coattails. But on the other hand, you know your way around seduction, maybe.
Right. So if there's a femme fatale there who's trying to convince me to do something, I can be like, well, actually... Exactly. I've heard this song sung before.
You might be able to play Sucker for a Pretty Face, again, in negotiation with me as the storyteller, and say, I've got some experience in this. I think I get a +2 on this roll to deal with her.
Right.
For persuasion or whatever the skill is you're going to use.
Right.
So you can then invoke that. There's other things too. Like I said, everything has aspects. The city has aspects. People have aspects. Your car might have an aspect. The room might have an aspect.
Mm-hmm.
For instance, if I, in combat, shoot out the lights, the room now gets the aspect Shrouded in Shadows.
Mm-hmm.
Well, now I can invoke Shrouded in Shadows to get a +2 bonus on my stealth roll.
Yeah.
To slip away.
Yep.
You know?
Yeah.
So therein lies your fate economy.
Okay.
And it's complicated.
Well, it can be very complicated.
Yeah.
It can also be very simplified. But again, you're adding the levels of complication.
Mm-hmm.
Like you can make it very technical. You can add a lot of details. I was reading about someone who basically, a group of D&D people switched over to Fate, basically to play some games, and someone's like, oh, you guys are playing an adventure, like a fantasy adventure in Fate. I'd love to join. Can you give me a bit about your story? And so they gave him the scenario, and he comes in, and literally when he sits down at the table, he's like, okay, so where are we? And the storyteller puts out 40 note cards with rooms and little blocks written on them and things like that. And everybody has got their sheets. He's like, what are these? He's like, oh, this is the dungeon we're in. Huh? Well, we wrote aspects for every one of the rooms as we went through them. So literally every step of the game, they were still playing tactical.
Wow.
And I was like, that would be painful.
That is overcomplicating things, man. But I understand. I understand that mindset. Because,
right.
And that's the exact problem I had getting into Fate, and frankly still do. Mm-hmm. I think it's one of the big reasons why I haven't moved away from D&D to start playing something like Fate.
Yep.
Is simply because it can be that can be the biggest hurdle, is the vague nature of aspects that if you can't bust out of that tactical, rigid, numeric thinking,
mm-hmm.
then it looks like then the game looks like a nightmare to you.
Well, and especially when you've got people who are always looking to succeed. You've got because D&D drives success.
Sure,
it requires failure is horrific.
Yeah, failure has consequences in D&D.
Well, it doesn't just have just have consequences. It has dire consequences.
Mm-hmm.
There is no value in failure in D&D.
Yeah,
your character gets no growth. You get set back, and in fact, more than one character can be set back.
That's true.
So it is a wholly different design in as far as advancement is concerned. Whereas if something doesn't go right in a Fate game or Apocalypse World game,
or Mouse Guard,
yeah, any of the systems like this, it is you don't slide into a spiral of doom and gloom. You just have a consequence, and you can move from there. So
yeah, absolutely. I'm looking over here at the live chat actually, and Knox in the Box is with us tonight. And says, "What if I don't think femme fatales are pretty? What if my pretty lady is less conventional or handsome gentleman? What if the DM tries to use a conventionally pretty person on me, and my character likes more the average looking people?"
I think
that was a
going on there. Pre-discussion with. I mean, when you're writing those things up, it isn't done in a vacuum.
Yeah,
you're not creating. Unlike D&D, you're not creating your character in a vacuum. You're creating in a very open sense. So, anytime you're creating a character in an open sense with the rest of the table, everybody kind of knows. The players know who your character is. Like, you will be discovering more of your character, obviously, as the game goes on, but it's going to be very different than a D&D game where, players may think one thing and the DM may think another, and you're opening up those discoveries to them as you go. You're like, no, that's not what I agree with. Whereas with this, they're going to be like, oh, yeah, that's Ted. Like, well, what's up with Ted? Oh, didn't you know? He's got to get home to his husband. That just happens. That's known beforehand. So I think in that sense, you run into a lot less of that in a Fate style game.
There's also negotiation that takes place. I mean, keeping in mind that you'd have gone over a lot of this stuff in character creation. What sucker for a pretty face? If that gets written on your character sheet, there's already been a discussion about why that aspect is there. What brought that aspect to be on your sheet? You're not making these characters in a vacuum, so your storyteller's already going to know that this person walking in fits your bill of what a pretty face is.
Yep.
Because they were there when you wrote them and told the story about why that aspect is important to your character.
Yep.
So, talk about skills?
Sure.
All right. So skills.
There's a giant skill list in the book. 100%. You know, right?
Well, I mean, there's your I would say your usual
generic
allotment.
List. Yes.
There's your usual allotment. Your athletics, your stealth, your melee combat, your persuasion. You know, you've seen them all before. If you played one role-playing game, you've probably seen most of this list.
Right.
There's nothing terribly shocking in there. What I think is great about the skills, though, is that generally you can kind of pick whatever you want, as long as they form a pyramid. And this is now pyramid in the 4th edition Fate Core rules. Okay, these do differ in certain other editions. In Dresden, you can assign your skills a little bit different because it runs off of actually 3rd edition Fate.
Okay.
But for the sake of our discussion, it has to be a pyramid. So you get 1 plus 4, 2 plus 3s, 3 plus 2s, and 4 plus 1s.
Okay.
And that's it. Just pick whatever skills you think are appropriate.
Yep. And assign them.
There's no classes, so there's no class skills, non-class skills, things like that, like you might be used to with D&D. Just pick them.
Yeah. I mean, maybe you're a plumber who, in the afternoon, really likes doing, trapeze work. That's their exercise. So you'll have crazy athletics.
Sure.
That normally you wouldn't think a plumber would have.
And I'm sure you've got some aspects on your sheet from your backstory describing how you got into, maybe you grew up as an athlete and a gymnast, but that wasn't bringing in the money, so you studied plumbing on the side, and now that's kind of become your thing, but you've never lost your thing for acrobatics.
Yeah, so some neat concepts that I saw out there was someone who was a barber. But because it was good money, there's always someone who needs their hair cut. But the person was actually like a biogeneticist who just didn't agree with all the teachers at school, and their parents are like, well, there's only so many PhDs who can do your work, so you're never going to make that money. And so he's like, well, I can always be a barber.
Yeah.
And so that was the two ends of the spectrum for that character. I'm like, that's pretty fun. Cool,
Yeah, exactly. Now, on top of your skills, and one of the other things too about skills, and I think we've done this in the past too, is sometimes if it's okay with your storyteller, leave blanks.
Yeah.
On your sheet.
Yeah, I like that idea completely.
Don't fill in all your skills, and then at an appropriate time, just be like, you know what, we haven't really defined this aspect about my character. What if he really actually is pretty good at firearms? Maybe he grew up doing this, maybe hunting with his father or something like that, and he knows his way around a rifle. Sure, okay. I've got a blank +2. I'm just going to fill in firearms and +2. All right, cool. It's kind of that organic style storytelling like that.
Right.
Now, skills can be used in one of 4 ways. Well, actually, multiple ways, but at any given time, only one of these ways.
Right.
Okay. But they all more or less use this particular formula. That is either to attack, and that does not mean just physical. You can use social attacks. You can use mental attacks to tear someone's psyche down, and to demoralize them. Intimidation is an attack.
It is.
But it's just a social attack. It's a mental attack. To defend, to stop someone from attacking you, to overcome, to tackle an obstacle of some sort. So for the house is collapsing, we need to make an athletic roll to get out in time.
Right.
That is to overcome that obstacle.
Right.
Or to create an advantage.
I like that.
Which is essentially writing an aspect or discovering an existing one, and then you get to invoke it for free. And I think Sean mentioned that earlier in the live chat, where I mentioned earlier, say, like shooting out the lights. So I'm going to roll firearms to create an advantage. Okay. That aspect, I'm going to essentially attack the room, which, the storyteller will negotiate with me what I need, depending on how the room's lights are described on there, what other duress I might be under.
Sure.
Okay. But then I'm going to make that firearms check. I'm going to roll my fate dice, and if it meets or exceeds my target number, perhaps then I've shot out the lights.
Yep.
Even if I fail, maybe I still shoot out the lights, but there might be some other consequences. Maybe I get hit with shards of glass. Maybe the bullet ricochets or something like that.
Right.
I don't know. Whatever.
Yep.
But the sky's the limit with it. But that's what I would use to create that aspect, Shrouded in Darkness. And I get to invoke it for free. So my next stealth check, +2, because I was the one that put that thing into being. So that's kind of where your tactics come in.
Yes.
Because in like something like D&D, you end up brute forcing your way through a lot of things, either with spells or with your big old sword or whatever, your animal companion. But with Fate, there's a lot more of creating and manipulating aspects and manipulating the scene to your advantage. And so I might know you have pretty good blind fighting. So I might actually create the aspect Shrouded in Darkness, knowing that you're going to get a bonus off of that. You can then invoke that, etc., etc., and it kind of goes from there, knocking people off balance, creating advantages for other players, disadvantages for your enemies, and things like that.
Gotcha. It creates synergies.
Sure.
And I think that it also lends a lot more flexibility in the sense that you can have people do things with their skill sets that they have that other systems, more tactical systems, wouldn't allow for.
Exactly, because your skill sets are perfectly narrative.
Yep.
You know? I mean, sure, you've got some numbers on your sheet, but what you are and what you can accomplish in the world, in the scene, in the story, is really just kind of how you tell it and what you're daring to do, you know?
Yeah, I could easily see a gunfight where, like, one of the characters is a psychiatrist and has basically their highest skill is, in negotiations or therapy, and one of his talents is get to the matter of it. And so during the firefight, literally the enemy shooting, and right in the middle, he's just like, I'm going to intimidate one of the other guys. Okay, what are you doing? I'm going to explain that he clearly has an inferiority problem with his firearms issue, and his missing is clearly a compounding issue on that, and that's got to be biting at him, and eventually he's going to run out of ammo, and we're just going to end up rushing him. Roll. Oh, look at all the successes.
Yep.
Suddenly the guy is reconsidering. Bullets aren't firing nearly as often.
He now has the aspect racked with doubt.
Yeah.
And Sarah, it's your turn.
Exactly.
Okay, well, since he's racked with doubt, I'm going to compel that.
Yeah. And it's things like that change scenes completely. It's closer to some of the stuff that 7th Sea does in using advantages and abilities to change whole outcomes.
Yes.
Using seduction in combat, which is something that you just don't normally get. It's not that you can't do that in tactile game, in tactical games, but it's not common, and it seems awkward. Whereas in this, you're literally coming up with the reason why.
It seems awkward, and oftentimes it's suboptimal.
Completely.
And again, with tactical games, optimization is kind of key. That's where your min-maxing comes from that we talked about.
Yes. It's not to say that Fate doesn't have min-maxing, and there aren't people who min-max in Fate, because you can very easily, just because it is narrative. And we'll kind of discuss that a little bit. But having that does kind of push you to something. Now, I know there's another thing that's beyond your skills, and that's those things called stunts.
Yes.
Now, stunts add another layer to who your character is in a special way.
Correct. They're kind of like special ways you've learned to use your skills. So you might there's a lot of stunts, and you can write your own. So I can't really get into particulars about what a stunt is, because it's really whatever's appropriate. Very much like everything else in the system. But stunts are special ways you've learned to use your skills. So you may be good at. So you mentioned acrobatics. The guy does trapeze, you said.
Right.
I'm trying to think of a stunt off the top of my head, but you might have a good athletics, but your athletics might get like another +2 bonus or something like that if you're specifically swinging or jumping from something.
So a stunt for something like that, which is much harder to try and figure out, Let's go with something simpler, like like firearms in general. If you're good at firearms, maybe you're a detective, and so you've got skill in firearms. You might have an aspect that speaks to your knowledge of firearms.
Sure.
But you might have a stunt, which is like ricochet.
Yeah.
So whenever you can ricochet a bullet, you get a bonus.
Mm-hmm.
So, it's those age-old things where, like, someone throws a frying pan up and then shoots it, and it bounces and hits the guy.
Right.
That's a perfect ricochet.
Right.
You see a guy off the glint of a car mirror, and so you bounce it off of the inside frame of the car, or things like that. So, you can get your result there, and that's more of an attack thing. But there's nothing to say that there aren't social ones as that.
Of
like
course there are.
like blind read is a perfect one where you can basically say, where you can pull information out of someone without them saying anything.
Yep.
Read micro emotions off of them might be a thing that you could do as a stunt. But it's an advancement of your character in a much more narrow direction.
Yes.
That gives you a bonus.
Almost like little minor superpowers, almost.
Yeah.
But just fun things just to add little bits of drama and little unique things that your character can do that make them.
Correct.
In the game.
Yep. Very much so.
So, all right. Looking a little bit further on here. Okay, so we talked about stunts a little bit. So our success measures then. Like we said, fail, tie, succeed, or succeed with style.
Yes.
Avec aplomb. Now, failure, like we mentioned, doesn't necessarily mean hard fail. Sometimes it does. But again, every die roll is a negotiation with the storyteller.
Right.
So, okay, my dice didn't come up. I'm -1 from what I needed. How does this play out? How do you think you failed, Rob? How do you think the die roll turns out? Well, maybe your character's a little, clumsy or something like that. So maybe they tripped over their own feet or whatever. Okay, maybe you still get out of the room or away from the danger that you were trying to dodge out of the way of, but you dropped one of your possessions. Which possession did you lose in there? Things like that. Tie might mean something you're going to succeed, but you're only going to partially succeed.
So I'm thinking very much back to Indiana Jones, where he's fighting the brute next to the plane, and he goes to headbutt him, and it doesn't work out, and basically he just falls right down. It's not that you failed in such a way that there's a consequence. You hit the ground, and you lost your hat. And your hat is on the other side of a fan blade that's coming at you. Oh, that's bad. That's bad. I'm not dead. I didn't knock myself out, but I want my hat back.
Right, exactly.
And that's something that kind of pushes that. So you can, a lot of times with 7C, as we, and even Mouse Guard, you can talk about this, is that you're not failing the people. You're not failing the character. You're just having a consequence of the action that you took, not succeeding in the way. Again, he goes to pull out his gun, and his gun isn't there because it fell out earlier. Kind of a thing.
Yeah.
And so now you have to rethink about what your next action is, or how you do it. So in that, it's different than a tactical game.
No,
so just giving examples.
And you might still end up with stress, which is the Fates version of damage. You don't have hit points so much as you have what's called a stress track, and depending on your social and mental and physical skills, you may have more or less stress available to you to be taken, essentially.
Right.
And when you hit certain amounts of stress, you have to have consequences for that. And there's a minor consequence, a moderate consequence, and a major consequence.
Okay.
Those terms might be wrong, but that's essentially small, medium, and large is what we're looking at. And again, those come in as aspects. A minor physical consequence might be, bumped and bruised.
Right.
aches and pains, something like that. But your major aspects might be something like crushed leg.
Right.
A major consequence is going to be something you're going to spend some time, and it's going to change your character.
Right.
For having taken that wound.
Yeah, and it doesn't necessarily have to be a wound, like a physical wound.
Well, for taking the consequence, yeah.
Right, but it has to wound your character.
Yes.
And I think there are some, like, marked for death, or hunted by the police have been described as things like that, where it is
social
the setting,
consequences, yeah.
social consequence that are against you, 100%.
Yeah.
You screw up something bad enough, and now literally every single game you're hunted.
Mm-hmm.
So that changes what you're able to do.
Yeah.
Every day. Mm-hmm. I did see someone mark that somebody had stated that a major consequence can be in jail.
Absolutely.
So you're not dead, you're in jail.
Yeah.
So that really limits your capabilities.
That incapacitates your character just as well as a lot of the physical stuff, you know?
Exactly.
So what are the game systems close to Fate? I think we mentioned 7th Sea.
7th Sea has a lot of aspects that are close to it, but I would not say it's the closest. 7th Sea is still a very tactical game, but it sits on that side of the line from Fate.
I think the Apocalypse World series system has
very
a
much
lot
so.
in common.
Exceptional amounts. Exceptional amounts.
In common.
I would say it would be, you would be, if you played Fate and you played Apocalypse World, and at the same table, but you didn't tell the people who are watching which game system you were playing, there'd be times when they'd be really hard-pressed to figure out which one you're playing.
That's true. I would say Apocalypse World is probably a lot more structured than Fate, but it feels the same.
Okay.
And I say structured because of how character creation goes and stuff like that. It's literally checkboxes.
That's true. That is true.
Pick 2 of these 8 abilities.
Yeah, it is streamlined in comparison.
Whereas Fate is, I don't know, what do you think your aspect is?
Right. And in that regard, and I know I'm kind of jumping a little bit ahead, but that can definitely make it more challenging. Mm-hmm. Fate can be a much more challenging system for a lot of different player types because of that. Because you do have to think and push out creativity and be able to have communications with not only the storyteller, but the rest of the players.
Exactly.
To be able to develop the world. So it takes a different type of group.
Yeah, absolutely.
To be able to play this game. Whereas if you get into something like, City of Mist, which is an Apocalypse World, or Urban Shadows, which is kind of closer to Fate, I would say, in the way that they do their design. You're given a lot, and there's a lot less concern that you have for being on the spot and being creative quickly. I mean, Adventure, Tales of the Aeon Society, makes you be creative.
Yeah.
But there are still things where you don't have to be. You don't always have to do editing in that game.
Yeah, it's available to you.
Right, whereas with Fate, it is something that happens every session.
Yeah.
And every player, to be effective, has to be able to do some editing.
They have to be able to do that, and you also have to have enough trust in your group to be able to have those negotiations not turn into arguments, essentially.
Right, it's not a debate.
Right, it's not a debate, it's not about who wins, it's just about, hey, I think this aspect on your character sheet might be an interesting complication here. How do you think that might play out if you accept this fate token? Well, I think something like this. Well, I think that's a bit harsh, maybe, but if you had this sort of reaction instead. Yeah, okay, I think that sounds fair. Here's your fate token.
Yeah, it's...
If you can move it along that quick,
right,
then you can play Fate.
Yeah, if you have people who are very rule-based, number-based, who need guidelines to say, this is how each turn goes, and this roll equals this, and I pull it off of this corner of my sheet, and these are the modifiers and deficits, I don't think those people are truly going to enjoy this game, because there is so much flexibility in it.
Yeah,
There's
exactly.
uncertainty even at the table beyond the dice. It is not just the dice that make the fate of the game. And in most cases, they just add a light randomness to the game. Likewise, if you have someone who is, and I'll flat out say it, a Mary Sue, who's playing a character who seems to have troubles, but every single time you're in some kind of an action, they are perfection. because they know how to communicate and be like, well, I'm going to use this ability and this because of this and because of this and this room thing, so I get a +6 on every roll. Forever. I'm always going to have a +6. I'm going to make sure I always have a +6. And okay, so you're always succeeding with +2. You're okay, and you're always editing for your own benefit.
Yeah. I mean, I don't know that that's as big of a problem as you might think it is, just simply because usually that requires an expenditure of one or more fate tokens.
Right.
And
you'll
so
eventually run out.
They have to take compels to get those back.
Right.
So and that's the good news about it, is that because there is that economy, there's give and take. Sure, you might have someone walk into a situation and lay down all of their abilities and just create a couple aspects, compel a couple other aspects, guess an aspect on your bad guy so that they get a free compel on it, and then wham, they end up with that massive +6 roll, and they come up with 3 pluses on the fate dice for a +9. They have succeeded with style, with like, a +7 on top of what they needed.
Right.
But what did they expend to get there?
Right.
And are they ever going to be able to do that ever again?
Right. And is that going to work for every situation? And I think for certain characters and in certain stories, people shine. And I think that's where I think people can get lost in the system, seeing that as a failure, and not realize that there is a little bit of guidance control to kind of pull back, and that's those tokens.
Yes.
The second side of that is, as a storyteller, there's still a storyteller involved in this. There's some leeway in the fate system to have a storyteller list system, but it's still a storyteller-based system, and in that you still have the ability to then move from character to character and situation to situation to give shine in different places, to put that spotlight in different areas.
Yes.
And that's what I think adds a lot of beautiful parts to the game.
Absolutely. So, why would you run Fate? What brings it to the table?
If, flat out, this is the easiest way I can say it, as a DM, I initially have to do less.
Yeah.
I start something very simple, let the characters create a lot of juice and put stuff into the pot, and at that point, they're giving me what I need to continue and give me a little creative leeway.
Exactly. It's like bringing ingredients for your chef to cook.
Correct.
Exactly.
Yeah.
I really like the fact that it's a generic setting.
Mm-hmm.
So you can really take it any way you want. Like I mentioned earlier, we were playing Wheel of Time with this.
Yeah. Yeah.
You know, we hashed together rules for the Aes Sedai, the Ashaman, all those sort of things that are unique to that setting, because the world building had already been done by the author of those books.
Yep.
All we needed to do was make up some characters and play in his playground.
And I'll say it, you have to bring a lot less dice to the table.
A lot less dice to the table.
So if you're,
which might be a detriment to some people.
To some people, but to those others who like buying dice for characters every time, it's a cheap way.
It is a low barrier of entry to get into this game.
All right, so we got some questions.
We do have some questions.
Let's start with Overwatch's Fate question first.
Yeah, right.
Frameworks and systems like Fate often do not come with anything beyond a generic setting or mythos. How do you feel this affects the campaign design and world building in general? That's a good question.
It's a great question.
I think it opens a lot of doors.
Yeah.
I think I think I'll start from the aspect from a new storyteller. It allows you a lot more flexibility on where you could play.
Yes.
So, if something's hot and new and you want to get some players involved in it, you can be like, okay, we're going to play a Marvel game in Fate.
Mm-hmm.
So what do you guys want to do? It's Marvel Universe. Let's figure out where we're going to be. And then at that point, the players help pull together where and what the setting is. Likewise, as a seasoned storyteller who's maybe told in different other game systems, it gives you a new system that if you want to throw a story together quickly, maybe even on like a camp out, you can very quickly throw together a Fate game.
That's where we played Dresden first, was when Sean and I went up north with his friends.
Funny that.
Yeah, exactly. It's great. And again, like you said, not a lot of dice, so one set of fudge dice for the table.
Yep.
I really like framework systems like Fate, honestly. Like I said earlier, you can really kind of do anything with them. And I think Fate is a really great middle ground between a completely blank slate and an established setting. Because you don't get that sort of intimidating blank canvas, oh god, the world of possibility is open to me, now what do I do with it sort of, decision paralysis with Fate, simply because the very first thing you do is sit down with your players and agree upon a setting.
Right.
And so once you can all kind of talk about the type of game you want to play and how you want to build the setting for where that game takes place, you've already got a direction, and you've got 3-4 other players giving you input on what they want to do.
Yeah.
Giving you all those ingredients.
As well as the feel. I mean, because you may still have, like, for instance, everybody might be like, hey, let's do something piratey. Okay, so what kind of piratey are we doing? Are we doing, like, Muppet Treasure Island? Or are we doing, like, on Darker Tides, or
Pirates of the Caribbean,
or Pirates of Darkwater,
right.
like how serious, what direction, and then like, are we going for plundering booty, or are we fighting a Royal Navy here? Like what kind of direction? And that really opens a lot of doors, but it also lets your players, like you said, voice where their minds are at, and it gives you the flexibility to be like, okay, 5 sessions in, this is suddenly turned into Muppet Treasure Island, and everybody seems to be loving it. Let's just keep going in that direction.
Yeah,
it happens.
Yeah, and you can do that, and the system is flexible enough that works.
Yep,
you can be just as lighthearted if you want to.
Yep.
So yeah, no, I actually really like Fate for campaign design and world building in general. Per your question, it's that great little middle ground right there between blank slate and established toolkit. And you can do a lot with it. So,
good choice.
All right. So Technolich asks, and this is a big question. I think it's a really good question. Mm-hmm. This is almost its own podcast episode.
We still might.
My daughter is playing an evil campaign.
Evil.
Do you have any tips for storytellers who want to run a campaign for the bad guys?
So where the players are evil.
Yeah. Well, characters. I'm sure the players are just fine.
No, they're evil. He did say daughter. I mean, we're just putting this out there.
Yes.
So I would say, anytime that you're playing, that you're thinking of running an evil campaign or a campaign for bad guys, you really have to ask, still, what's the story? What kind of feel do you guys want to have? Is this a mystery? Is this a intrigue? Is this a murder hobo session? Like, where are you going with this? At that point, really where the characters come from determines the flavor. Like, I would love to see a henchman campaign from D&D where basically all of the villains are dead. And so the henchmen have all of these resources that they now have to hide that the villain's dead.
Crap, what am I going to do with 27 catapults?
Exactly. Like,
I got no one to siege anymore.
That's right. Or worse yet, all of the stuff is locked up because the keys are gone. So now they have 2 problems. One, someone's eventually going to find those keys and want to come in and start looting their places. So they've got to prepare for it. Or 2, they've got to hide things. Or 3, they've got to go hire adventurers to help them break in.
Oh, God.
So, I mean, there's all kinds of aspects that you can do with evil characters or an evil setting. And remember, villains aren't villains in their stories.
Yeah, villains are typically the heroes of their own stories.
So I think that's just an angle to look at.
Yeah. I gotta be dead honest, I'm not big on evil campaigns. I personally don't enjoy being evil. And so I almost feel remiss that I don't have a lot of great advice to give you, other than the question of, like, why would you want to do that? But hey, it's fun for some people, so that's, if that's where you're at, that's where you're at.
Yeah, I mean, and I think
it can be fun just to, like, instead of pretending to be the good guys and being murder hobos, to just say, no, we're the bad guys and be murder hobos. You know?
Yeah, just throw off the mask, go full dark.
Exactly.
And lean into it.
Exactly.
Which I've definitely seen. I've definitely seen that. And sometimes that's just a relief on its own,
But I think if I were going to run an evil campaign, I think it might be lesser baddies trying to topple bigger baddies to become the big baddies.
Well, I mean, that's the whole, like, Punisher design, is I don't follow the law. Because because I can do things you can't.
Mm-hmm.
And sometimes that's got to be done.
Exactly.
You know, Deadpool. Well, just shooting the guy in the end, like, no, we're supposed to take him in. I'm not an X-Men.
No, because in the end, it's still kind of anti-heroes.
Right, but that's what I'm saying
but what I'm thinking more is like your henchman campaign
rising up.
But instead of like, well, the villains are gone, and now I guess that makes us the villains.
Right.
The campaign is making the established villains gone, so we can be the villains.
Okay. Rise of power.
Yeah, exactly.
All right.
Like, I'm Dracula's servant.
Mm-hmm.
How do we kill a vampire?
Yeah. Like, I know how to kill Dracula, but he can also read my mind. So I need to go talk to Ted, who he can't read his mind,
exactly,
to help me kill Dracula.
Because Ted is some other different type of horrible monster. And, yeah, exactly.
Yeah, Beholderkin, who I can't look at on a regular basis.
Right.
You know, but and I think, again, you're dealing with some tropey comedy involved in that, where they're basically trying to assassinate each other's...
Maybe, but you could play this straight. You could absolutely play this straight.
Yeah.
I mean, what we're spitballing here at the table definitely has like a pulpy level of like what was that
ridiculousness?
Movie with Gene Wilder, the horror movie where it was Victor von Frankenstein.
You mean Young Frankenstein?
Young Frankenstein.
Yeah.
Yes, Frankenstein.
It's Frankenstein.
Yeah, like, you know, that sort of level of comedy, you know.
Okay.
But you could absolutely play it straight.
Yeah.
I mean, villains toppling other villains, I'm sure, happens all the time. Nobody has scruples in the underworld, you know?
No. It does happen a lot. Just look at the Red Wizards of Thay. We won't talk any further than that.
Exactly. We don't speak of them.
All right. Mad Elf asks, what challenges does the versatility and flexibility of the system introduce into terms of developing stories and building worlds? That is some of the stuff we already talked about a little bit, and that is that you may have a rigid idea of the world as a storyteller who's done a lot of that. Mm-hmm. And when you bring it to your players and they start changing things, it's going to be harder for you to think yes and no answers, or yes and answers for them. You know, where it's like, oh, you know, we're going to be doing this in Forgotten Realms. Oh, okay, that's an established world, so I'm going to be the son of a red wizard. Well, you can't be. Well, why? Because you can't be. You're going to be too powerful. Mm-hmm. Like, right there as a storyteller, you're like, you've already got it in your mind kind of what's going on with the world, whereas that's not really where design like this works. Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. So it can be very jarring for people who are strict world designers, where it's their world and the players are formatting within that.
Yeah, I would say that's probably my biggest challenge, too, is, you know, thinking in very concrete terms. This question comes from the Mad Elf, who is our storyteller in our Mouse Guard game. Mm-hmm. And Mad Elf, you know directly that I've had issues at your table before going, what do you mean I don't fail?
Right.
What do you mean there's no failure in Mouse Guard?
Yep.
You wanted 4 successes. I rolled 1.
Right.
That is way under. How did I not botch this?
Right.
You know, what do you mean the story continues?
Mm-hmm.
You know? Mm-hmm. And it's something for me, like I said earlier, is a being brought up in with a healthy amount of D&D, I tend to think of things very concretely. And if you're like me, and you look at things numerically and concretely and discreetly, then the versatility and flexibility of the system is going to be difficult for you to wrap your head around. And it's going to make the world feel very rigid. It's going to make the game system feel like it's fighting you at every step. And the biggest challenge is going to be leaning into it and understanding that it's not a story, it's a collaboration. Mm-hmm. It's not a role, it's a negotiation. Mm-hmm. And it's not a tactical combat game.
Shit, we're done. It is. We don't hear it anymore in our headsets, and I apologize for that. It is not a game. So sorry about that, Sarah. I totally killed you.
It's alright. Hey, if the music's playing, You can find us on Twitter at @ST_Conclave, on Instagram @ST_Conclave. You can listen to us live every Wednesday night, 7 p.m. Eastern Time on mixlr.com/storyteller-conclave. And join us on Discord. You can find the link to our Discord up on our Twitter, as well as at our website, where you can listen to all these episodes as well, at storyteller-conclave.blueberry.net.
We'd like to thank our Patreon members, Nox, Sam, and the Arcane Asylum, who help us immensely, as well as the rest of our Patreon members, keeping this show going and helping us get the new equipment we need, and basically is keeping all these services up for you, our listeners, who we love ever so much. Our intro music is Beyond the Warriors by Guy Frog. You can find that at guyfrogmusic.weebly.com. Our outro music is Only Our Footprints in the Sand by Midair Machine. You can find that at soundcloud.com/midairamachine/tracks.
And a big shout out, as always, to our family, Vicky and Sean, all of our friends who've sat with us at our tables over the years, and to you, every one of our listeners. We love you. Stay safe. Good night.
Good night.